where does Arch Manning rank among the best quarterbacks going into the season?
I think Arch Manning's one of the three best quarterbacks in college football. I know the sample size is a little bit small. He started a couple games last year, but he looked the part. He looks the part of the Manning name. I think he's going to live up to the hype. I think it's Arch Manning along with Clemson's Cade Klubnik and Garrett Nussmeier from LSU as the three best quarterbacks in all of college football.
I think everyone agrees he has a ceiling to be the best quarterback in the country, but I do think the hype's a little crazy given the sample size right now. So I would say entering the season, I probably have him comfortably in that top 10, but maybe just outside that top 5. Want to see it a little bit more. Want to see what he does against the best defenses and the toughest road environments in the country. But yeah, I've got guys like Garrett Nussmeier, Lenora Sellers just slightly ahead of him, and I'll put Arch right there on the cusp of top 5, and I could have egg on my face as soon as week 1 when they go play Ohio State on the road.
Arch Manning enters the season as the Heisman favorite, but since 2009, only once has the preseason Heisman favorite actually won it. So how do you think Arch can stay in the hunt? Does he have the tools to keep this a competitive race throughout the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's probably going to be in the conversation from start to finish. It's really just a matter of making sure all this talent and all this hype comes to fruition. I think Texas does have some new guys that they have to work in at wide receiver, and that's going to be a big key as well as getting that chemistry down. But yeah, I think he's there from start to finish, and I think if there's anyone that runs away with the Heisman this year, it's probably Arch.
Yeah, Arch has a chance to establish himself as the Heisman frontrunner in week 1. Texas plays at Ohio State the first week of the season. That's a preview of a potential national championship matchup, or at the very least a playoff matchup. Those teams met in the college football playoff semifinals last year, so Arch can do a lot to either move to the top, I think, of the Heisman pecking order after week 1, or he may backslide a little bit depending on what happens in that initial game.
When you look at the SEC season ahead, is Texas or Georgia the team to beat this year?
I think it's Texas, and I think it's because of the quarterback position. I think both teams have very talented rosters. We know this. They both recruit very, very well. Both coaches are established, proven coaches, but Steve Sarkisian has proven the last few years that he's got it rolling at Texas. They're going nowhere. They're here to stay toward the top of the conference. But I do think Texas is in good shape at quarterback with Arch Manning. Georgia, I think it's a little bit more of a mystery. Gunnar Stockton likely to be the quarterback there. We saw him at the end of last season. But I think the ceiling is certainly higher for Arch Manning. Just looking at quarterback, and we know both teams are talented in other spots.
I think both teams have ridiculously high floors. It would almost be a surprise if either of these teams misses out on the college football playoff this year because of the type of talent and depth they have. But Arch Manning just has the potential to be a separator, compared to Gunnar Stockton, who I think is going to be a good quarterback. But like we've already discussed, Arch has the potential to be the best quarterback, a Heisman winner. So I just think that right now it's Texas probably has the elevated ceiling, the more potential. And I think they do have maybe one or two fewer questions at the likes of wide receiver and along the offensive line right now.
Which SEC team will surprise fans this season, whether it's for a good reason or a bad reason?
I think it's unfortunate, that the Vols couldn't make it work with Nico Iamaleava, but with him, they would have been a national title contender. That can't be said with the current question marks at quarterback, but 9th place in the SEC preseason media poll, I think, below the likes of South Carolina and Florida. I just think Tennessee's going to have a great defense. Heupel has proven he is a really good SEC coach. They're going to be able to run the ball, and I think that they're in for a surprisingly strong season without Nico Iamaleava. Do they compete for an SEC title? Probably not, but I don't think the drop-off is going to be as severe as maybe some fans might expect.
I look at Missouri. Missouri was picked to finish 12th in the SEC. This is a program that's won 21 games the past 2 seasons. Now, they're transitioning at quarterback. They brought in Bo Perbula, former Penn State backup. We know Bo Perbula is a very good runner. Remains to be seen whether he can be that pocket passer that Missouri would need him to be, but Missouri did very, very well in the transfer portal this offseason. They've reloaded. If Bo Perbula is a nice quarterback, I think there's a lot of wins out there for them. They drew the most favorable schedule, I think, of any SEC team, certainly one of the most favorable schedules. And a lot of where you finish in the conference standings, that schedule is a big influence. So the fact that they were picked 12th in the 16-team SEC, I think that's a bad misread by the media in that preseason predicted order of finish, and I think this is a program that continues to be overlooked. I don't know that they're in the playoff, but I do think this is a team that can be in the hunt when you combine pretty steady, solid roster with very favorable schedule draw.
Who are your top SEC title contenders this year?
I think there's 4 contenders for the SEC conference title. That the top 4 group, I would say, and my pecking order is probably Texas, Georgia, LSU, and Alabama. All 4 have talented rosters. Georgia and Alabama have some questions at the quarterback position. Georgia probably going to go with Gunnar Stockton. Saw a little bit of him last year, but still largely unproven. And then Alabama most likely going with Ty Simpson, who's a veteran backup, former 5-star recruit, but just hasn't played much throughout his Alabama career. But we know those programs are pretty loaded at other spots. And then Texas and LSU certainly are in that mix for the conference title. Arch Manning, one of the best quarterbacks, I think, in the country. He's got to go prove that, but I think he will prove that this season. And then Garrett Nussmeier is as established as any quarterback in the country, leading LSU. LSU smashed it in the transfer portal. I think they're loaded with talent. So those are my 4 contenders for the conference title.
I got the same top 4, but I do think that Georgia, Texas, and Alabama might be in their own tier above LSU with the Tigers knocking on the door. Georgia has to play both Alabama and Texas this season, which, the other 2 in that top trio don't have to do. I think, maybe that's a cause for concern of whether the Bulldogs get to Atlanta. And you could easily convince me, like Blake was saying, LSU's working the transfer portal, Garrett Nussmeier, that they belong up there. But it's just been a while since the Tigers had an elite defense. They get Harold Perkins back. I've just got some reservations about it all coming together, working around a young offensive line. And last year, the running game was so bad. If that doesn't improve in a big way, I just don't see them being at that level of Georgia, Texas, and Alabama.
Which team could be a dark horse contender for the SEC title?
I don't know if they qualify, if dark horse is the perfect adjective, but I just don't think people are talking enough about Texas A&M. They were in the SEC title race going into the last week of the regular season in 2024. They're bringing back a ton of talent. I think Marcel Reed is going to take a huge step forward in his sophomore season as the starting quarterback, a stable of running backs. And I just love Mike Elko as a head coach, what he did at Duke, what he did at his first season at A&M. I think they're going to be, again, in the hunt in November. The biggest question for me is, can they generate more of a pass rush, get to the quarterback? If that happens, I think the defense is going to take a step forward, and A&M will be right there with the elites of the SEC at the end of the year.
A year ago, Ole Miss was one of the most hyped teams in the country at this time of year, and they missed the playoff. They fell short of the standard, and it feels like there's almost been an overcorrection with Ole Miss. Like it's crickets in the preseason hype for Lane Kiffin's Rebels, and I still think this is a pretty good Ole Miss team. But Lane Kiffin has the transfer game figured out as well as anybody in the country. He's got another great class of talent coming in from the portal. The key is, how good's Austin Simmons, the quarterback? They're replacing Jackson Dart. From what we saw of Austin Simmons last year in a limited sample size as a backup, he looks like he's got all the tools, high ceiling, and we know Lane Kiffin's a good quarterback developer. So I think if you're looking for a sleeper, Ole Miss is in that conversation. The schedule breaks relatively nicely for them. And again, a year after they underperformed and failed to meet the bar, I think this is maybe a year where nobody's talking about them. They could exceed the expectations.